What happens when one of television's most formidable titans finds himself ensnared in the most hostile interview of his life? It becomes a moment of pure, unfiltered television chaos, one that even a master showman like Steve Harvey could never have anticipated. He entered the studio expecting a friendly volley of questions, a routine charm offensive. After all, The View had always been a safe harbor. But what was about to unfold was a televised ambush, a confrontation so shocking it would leave the nation stunned and debating for weeks, before diving into the heart of this on-air battle. The narrator urges viewers to subscribe and comment. Which talk show host is the true master of on-screen conflict? Because by the end of this breakdown, the polished veneer of daytime television will feel permanently cracked. This wasn't just an interview spiraling off course. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare, clashing egos, and the raw, unpredictable danger of live broadcasting. It all began on what should have been a routine Tuesday morning. Steve Harvey strode onto the set of The View, wearing his iconic high-wattage smile. The 1 millions associated with humor, wisdom, and that unmistakable Steve Harvey swagger. His suit was immaculate, a deep navy ensemble with a patterned tie that radiated confidence without arrogance. As he approached the guest chair, he gave his jacket a small, casual tug, the gesture of a king returning to familiar territory. The studio audience erupted in thunderous applause, a wave of energy bouncing off the stage lights and camera lenses. These were his people, loyal fans who had followed him for decades, their faces lit up with admiration. The atmosphere was electric, charged in celebration of a man who had built a legacy on authenticity and connection. The hosts Whoopi Goldberg, Sarah N. and Sunny Hostin greeted him with warmth and inviting smiles. Their energy promised an easy, breezy conversation. Whoopi, the seasoned captain of the table, leaned in with her signature blend of authority and comfort. But on the far end sat Joy Behar, positioned like a predator lying in wait. Her posture was closed off, arms crossed, body angled away. While the others radiated friendliness, Joy's expression was cold and sharp, her eyes quietly calculating. Steve noticed. A lifetime in the spotlight had trained him to recognize hostility instantly. But he dismissed the feeling as ordinary live television nerves. Steve Harvey. Everyone, Whoopi announced as applause surged. "We are so excited to have you here today." "Thank you for having me," Steve replied, flashing the $1 million grin that defined his career. "Always a pleasure to be with you, ladies." Sarah opened the conversation with bright enthusiasm. "Steve, your new book about relationships is a runaway success. What inspired you to write another guide for couples?" Steve leaned forward, perfectly at ease. Relationship advice, blended with humor and wisdom, was his home turf. "You know, Sarah," he began smoothly, "after decades of hosting Family Feud and talking to thousands of families, I've learned that communication is the key." He launched into a vivid, charming narrative about the countless couples he'd encountered, the newlyweds, the long-suffering, the ones falling apart, and the ones who had lost the ability to speak to each other. He shared their humor, their pain, and the hard-won truths they revealed to him. The audience was captivated, nodding, smiling, hanging on every word. But as Steve spoke, the camera drifted to Joy. She wasn't nodding. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't pretending. She simply stared at him, her gaze narrowing like a blade. Her expression simmered with a warning of what was to come. And when couples stop really listening to each other, that's when the real problems begin, Steve concluded, his tone warm and authoritative. The audience murmured in agreement. It was classic Steve-wise, poised and effortlessly in command. "That's beautiful," Sunny said kindly. "And the reviews for your book have been incredible," Sarah added. But Joy was shifting in her seat, a coiled serpent, preparing to strike. Her face hardened, her jaw tightened, her body leaned forward with calculated precision. Steve felt the temperature in the room drop. Joy. You look like you've got something to say, he joked, trying to keep things light. But the smile didn't soften her. Well, Steve, Joy began, her voice slow and deliberate. I've been reading your book, and I have to ask, don't you think it's a little hypocritical for someone who's been married 3 times to be giving relationship advice? The air in the studio turned to ice. The background chatter died. The laughter evaporated, and the temperature seemed to drop as every person at the table froze in place. Sunny's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. Sarah's smile collapsed into a mask of shock. Even Whoopi's eyes widened, the unmistakable look of a host who knew they had just crossed into hostile territory. For a split second, Steve's $1,000,000 smile faltered. A crack in the armor just long enough for the entire world to witness the sting before he recovered. Joy, he said, his voice a pillar of calm. I think my experiences, both good and challenging, actually give me more insight into what works and what doesn't. He pressed his hands together on the table as if anchoring himself against the coming storm. Every relationship teaches us something. But Joy wasn't there for a lesson. She was there for a fight. But Steve, she pressed, leaning. And you've publicly talked about your first 2 marriages ending in divorce. How can you sit here and tell other people how to make their marriages work when you couldn't make yours work? Whoopi moved in fast, trying to de-escalate. Joy, I think what Steve is saying is that no. Whoopi, Joy snapped, throwing up a hand to silence her. Let him answer. A collective gasp rippled through the stunned audience. Off camera, the producers were paralyzed. I think our viewers deserve to know. Joy continued, her voice sharp with accusation. Why they should take relationship advice from someone with such a track record. Steve inhaled a long, slow breath through his nose. His jaw tightened, not in anger, but with the immense effort of a man containing a hurricane. Even under this brutal personal assault, Steve Harvey remained a professional. Well, he said slowly, his voice still steady, but now carrying a harder edge. I'm not sure what you're trying to get at here. His gaze locked onto hers in a silent declaration that the rules had changed. But I've been happily married to my wife, Marjorie, for over 15 years. We have a beautiful blended family. And yes, I learned from my past mistakes. That's what growth looks like. Growth. Joy repeated, her laugh sharp enough to slice through the air. Or is it just good marketing? Another gasp shuddered through the audience. Joy folded her arms, a fortress of smug judgment. I mean, how convenient that your personal struggles become best-selling books. A wave of uneasy murmurs swept across the room. Sarah raised a hand to her mouth, mortified. Sunny looked ready to leap across the table to rescue Steve. Even the usually unflappable Whoopi shifted uncomfortably. Her expression a clear signal that this moment was spiraling out of control. But Joy wasn't finished. And another thing. Steve, she said, her voice dropping to an icy chill. Those comedy specials from the 90s, some of that material about women has aged poorly, hasn't it? So how can anyone be sure your advice isn't just the same old, outdated thinking? Steve placed his coffee mug on the table, but the gesture was anything but gentle. It landed with a muffled yet unmistakable thud the microphones eagerly captured. His patience, stretched to its limit, was beginning to fray. Joy, he said, turning his body fully to face her, his posture a wall of defiance. I came here to talk about helping people build stronger relationships, not to be put on trial. For things I said decades ago as a comedian, His voice remained level, but carried steel now. A clear warning, a boundary drawn in the sand. Comedy evolves. People evolve. And I think my track record speaks for itself. Asterisk, a few audience members offered tentative applause, as if afraid to break the tension. Others simply stared, stunned by the raw intensity unfolding before them. This was no longer a playful disagreement. This was no simple difference of opinion. This was Joy Behar conducting a full-scale interrogation on live television and Steve Harvey refusing to be broken. Asterisk does it though. Joy fired back instantly, her voice a razor's edge. Because from where I'm sitting, Steve, it looks a whole lot like you're profiting from giving advice about something you've struggled with your entire life. Asterisk, a low, ominous rumble moved through the crowd. Steve blinked hard, the verbal blow landing with visible force. He opened his mouth to respond, but Joy pressed on relentlessly. Asterisk, and frankly, she added, twisting the knife, some of your past comments about women, the ones you made, willingly suggest you might not be the best person to be telling them how to find love. Asterisk, the room went ice cold. Sunny stared, jaw slightly open. Sarah looked as if she wanted the floor to swallow. Her whole, even Whoopi, veteran of countless chaotic on-air moments, seemed taken aback by how far Joy was pushing this confrontation. Asterisk, leaning in, Whoopi made another attempt to intervene. Maybe we should talk about the positive feedback the book has received. Asterisk, no, Whoopi, Steve cut in, and his voice changed. The calm was still there, but barely a thin veneer over something hard and unyielding. He had reached his limit. Asterisk, he turned toward Joy, eyes locked. Joy wants to have this conversation, he announced, his voice low and steady. So let's have it, Joy. Asterisk, the very air in the studio seemed to thicken, crackling with electricity. Asterisk, you're sitting here trying to tear me down in front of millions of viewers, Steve continued. And for what? What's your agenda? Asterisk, Joy leaned back with a slow, satisfied smirk, as if she'd just cornered him completely. My agenda is truth, Steve, she replied smugly. Our viewers deserve to know who they're taking advice from. Then, tilting her head with condescension, she added, and honestly, your defensive reaction is pretty telling. Asterisk, that was the spark that lit the fuse. Steve's posture snapped straight, his eyes narrowing as a controlled power surged beneath his voice. Asterisk, defensive. He repeated, you're, asterisk, attacking my character, my marriage, my career. You expect me to just sit here and smile. Steve turned toward the audience, pulling them into the conflict. That's not happening, ladies and gentlemen, asterisk. But Joy, predictably, wasn't finished. She never was. Asterisk, Steve Harvey, everyone, she announced with dripping sarcasm, gesturing toward him as though presenting a failed circus act. This is what happens when you ask legitimate questions. He falls apart. That crossed a line. The sharp scrape of Steve's chair against the studio floor echoed like a gunshot. He was on his feet in an instant. The sudden movement jolted everyone. Sarah gasped out loud. Sunny reached toward him instinctively. Whoopi's eyes darted toward the production crew, who were frozen behind their cameras. Asterisk, Steve planted both hands on the table, leaning forward not with menace, but with an unshakable authority. He spoke. Asterisk, I'm not falling apart. Joy, he said, his voice low, powerful, commanding. I'm calling out your unprofessional behavior. Asterisk, he paused, letting the accusation hover in the suffocating silence. Asterisk, this isn't journalism, he said, each word slow and deliberate. This is you trying to create a moment. Asterisk's Joy raised her eyebrows in feigned amusement, but something shifted. For the first time, the tiny smirk she wore so confidently flickered. Steve had just hit back harder than she expected. Asterisk, the tension in the studio escalated to a level rarely seen on daytime television. Viewers across the country leaned toward their screens as the live audience held its breath. What had begun as an interview was becoming an implosion, raw, personal, and volatile. Steve Harvey, the man known for keeping calm through chaos, was now standing his ground with a fire no one saw coming. Asterisk, what happened next would determine whether this moment became a footnote or one of the most infamous blow-ups in talk show history. Asterisk, this is character assassination, Steve declared. His voice sliced through the still air like thunder. The studio fell so silent you could hear the hum of the lights overhead. Audience members covered their mouths, eyes wide with disbelief. Some leaned forward, terrified to blink. Others looked downright distressed. This wasn't light-hearted television anymore. It was something darker, sharper, and deeply uncomfortable. Asterisk, at the table, the co-hosts were paralyzed. Sunny shot Whoopi a nervous glance. Ugh. Sarah clutched her note card so tightly her fingers turned white. No one knew what to do. Asterisk, sit down. Steve Joy commanded sharply. Her voice cut through the tension like a blade. You're embarrassing yourself. Asterisk, I'm embarrassing myself, Steve repeated. He released a short, bitter laugh, one filled more with hurt than humor. Joy, you've spent the last 10 minutes trying to humiliate me on national television. And you think I'm the one who's embarrassed? Asterisk, he gestured toward the audience, then locked his glare on her. You know what's embarrassing? Grown woman who thinks bullying is good television. Joy's face flushed a furious red. Bullying? She snapped. I'm asking legitimate questions. Questions any responsible journalist would ask. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't be on talk shows. Asterisk, legitimate questions, Steve echoed, incredulous. Joy, you didn't. Ask about my book. You didn't ask about my family. You didn't ask about my work, my philanthropy, nothing. You went straight for the throat the moment I sat down. That's not journalism. That's a hit job. Asterisk. Oh, please, Joy scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically. You're being theatrical. This is how interviews work in the real world, Steve. We don't just throw you softballs so you can promote your book. Asterisk, Steve's composure finally began to crack. He pointed a finger squarely at her. Asterisk, Joy, I've done thousands of interviews. I've sat on every major network, every flagship program. I know the difference between a challenging question and a calculated takedown. And what you're doing falls squarely into the second category. Asterisk, out of the stunned silence, Whoopi finally stepped in. Hands raised like she was trying to calm a storm. Maybe we should go to commercial? No? Steve sliced through the suggestion with one sharp word. Joy ignited this, and we're going to extinguish it right here. Asterisk, a wave of disbelief rolled through the studio. No, one, not the audience, not the hosts, was prepared for a guest to seize control of a live broadcast. Asterisk's Joy folded her arms, leaning back with a smug shield of defiance. Fine, Steve, let's see this through. Then she lunged back into the attack. You want to talk about personal assaults, she said, leaning in, eyes locked onto his like a predator closing in. Let's talk about you. She jabbed a finger at him, a weapon. Let's dissect the empire you built on the backs of female caricatures, on degrading jokes, on reducing women to punchlines. And now, she sneered, you dare to reinvent yourself as some kind of relationship sage. A harsh, derisive laugh escaped her. You've made a fortune off women for decades, Steve, and now you expect them to trust you, asterisk. A scoff escaped Joy's lips, sharp and disdainful. Capacity is breathtaking. Asterisk at his sides. Steve's hands curled into tight fists, nod in threat. but in a desperate attempt to contain the storm of anger, hurt, and pure bewilderment. Surging inside him, "Asterisk Joy," he began, his voice low, strained, almost pleading for sanity. "You clearly harbor some deep-seated grievance against me, because this degree of animosity. This isn't standard procedure." His palms opened slightly, a gesture of raw confusion. "Did I slight you somewhere? Did a careless word at some industry event offend you? Because this feels intensely personal." Asterisk, "Don't flatter yourself," she snapped, her tone cutting like ice. "This has nothing to do with you personally. This is about accountability." Asterisk, "Accountability," Steve echoed. The word tasting bitter. Asterisk, "You can't erase your history." Joy pressed on ruthlessly. "You can't demand the world develop amnesia just because you've rebranded." Asterisk, "My past," Steve repeated, his voice fracturing not from fragility, but from the shock of how far she was willing to go. He took a slow step back, drawing a breath that seemed to drain the air from the room. "Joy, my past is sleeping in a car because I didn't have a home. It's working every menial job imaginable just to eat. My past is clawing my way from absolute zero to build an enterprise that puts food on hundreds of families' tables." Asterisk, his voice grew stronger, fortified by truth. "My past is pouring millions into charities, mentoring young comics, helping kids dealt impossible hands. That's my past." He gestured toward the silent audience. "But you want to crucify me for punchlines I delivered 3 decades ago." Asterisk, Joy dismissed everything with a flick of her wrist, as if swatting away a gnat. "Oh, spare us the melodrama." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. "Steve, countless people rise from hardship," she continued coldly, "without building careers on demeaning women." A heavy, suffocating silence swallowed the studio. Sarah's voice finally broke through, thin and trembling. "Joy, I think we may be crossing a line." Asterisk, but the line had already been obliterated. The confrontation had cemented itself as one of the most volatile, uncomfortable exchanges daytime television had ever witnessed. The storm was far from over. Asterisk, "This is a public dismantling of a man's character," Steve declared, his voice thundering through the silent studio. The air felt thick, charged, almost buzzing. Audience members shielded their mouths, their eyes wide, torn between shock and discomfort. Some leaned forward, unwilling to miss a single second. Others looked genuinely distressed. Asterisk at the host's table. The other women sat frozen, statues in the midst of chaos. Sunny threw a panicked glance at Whoopi. Sarah's knuckles were bone white as she gripped her cards. The rules of the broadcast had evaporated. Asterisk, "Sit down," Steve, Joy commanded sharply, her voice slicing through the tension. "You're making a spectacle of yourself." Asterisk, "A spectacle." He let out a hollow, bitter laugh, heavy with hurt. "Joy, you've spent the last 10 minutes trying to humiliate me on national television, and you have the audacity to say I'm the one causing a scene." Asterisk, his arms swept toward the audience, then snapped back toward her. "You want to know what's truly a spectacle? A grown woman who mistakes cruelty for compelling television." Asterisk, Joy's face ignited in rage. "Cruelty? I'm asking legitimate questions. Questions any credible journalist should ask. If you can't handle them, perhaps you shouldn't be on talk shows at all." Asterisk, "Legitimate questions," Steve repeated, disbelief rising like a tide. "Joy, you opened this segment with an attack. You didn't ask about my book, my children, my charity work, nothing. You came for the jugular the moment I walked onto this stage." Asterisk, he shook his head, confusion and exasperation etched into his expression. "That's not journalism. That's a premeditated takedown." Asterisk, "Oh please," Joy scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically. "This is how real interviews work, Steve. We don't toss you softballs just so you can sell your latest project. Asterisk Steve's composure finally began to fracture. His finger pointed at her, trembling with restrained emotion. Joy, I've done thousands of interviews. I know the difference between tough questions and personal attacks. And what you're doing is the latter. Asterisk Whoopi finally stepped in, hands raised cautiously. Maybe we should take a commercial break. Asterisk, no. Steve's voice was sharp, decisive. Joy started this, and we're going to finish it right here, right now. Asterisk. Ripple of shock tore through the studio. No guest had ever taken command like that. Asterisk Joy crossed her arms, leaning back with a taunting smirk. Fine, Steve. Let's finish it. Asterisk, she leaned forward, eyes locked on his like a predator closing in. You want to talk about personal attacks? Let's talk about you. She jabbed a finger at him. Let's talk about how you built a career stereotyping women. Laughing at them, reducing them to caricatures, and now you want to play the wise relationship expert. Asterisk, she scoffed. The hypocrisy is stunning. Asterisk Steve's fists tightened again, not raised, but trembling with everything he refused to unleash. Asterisk Joy, he said, voice low and pained. You clearly have some personal issue with me, because this hostility, this is not normal. His hands lifted in a helpless gesture. Did I offend you? Did I say something years ago? Because this feels deeply personal. Asterisk, don't flatter yourself, she repeated coldly. This isn't personal. This is accountability. Asterisk Steve stared at her, stunned. You can't. Just reinvent yourself, Joy continued. And expect everyone to forget your past. Asterisk my past, he said softly, is homelessness. Hunger, working every job I could find. My past is grinding from nothing to build a company that feeds hundreds of families. My past is giving millions to charity, mentoring young performers, helping children who had no chance. Asterisk, he looked toward the crowd again. But all you want to focus on is jokes from 30 years ago. Asterisk's Joy waved her hand dismissively.
Oh.
Here comes the sob story. Gasps shot through the studio like sparks. Plenty of people overcome adversity, Steve, she continued, cold and unwavering. Without making degrading comments about women.